Bob Hayes pushed his cleaning cart down the curved hallway of Crossroads Hub. The wheels squeaked against the metal floor, making the same sound they had made for the past 14 years. He knew every scratch on these walls, every stain that would not come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. The diplomatic quarters were always busy. Today was no different. Through the open doors, he could see aliens from 12 different worlds talking in their strange languages. Some looked like giant lizards with colorful scales. Others were tall and thin with skin that seemed to be made of crystal. A few looked almost human except for their blue skin and extra arms. Bob had learned not to stare. When humans first joined the Galactic Coalition 20 years ago, everyone stared at everyone else. Now it was normal. Well, mostly normal. He stopped outside Conference Room 7 and began mopping the floor. The door was slightly open and voices drifted out. Bob had heard thousands of these meetings over the years. Usually they talked about trade routes or mining rights. Today was different. "The hegemony fleet grows stronger each day," said a voice that sounded like grinding stones. That was Ambassador Rock, one of the stone men from the Granite system. "Our scouts report they have taken 3 more systems in the Outer Rim." "We cannot allow this to continue," replied a musical voice. Bob recognized it as Ambassador Lyra, one of the crystal people called Valdorians. She was always polite to him, unlike some of the others. "The Coalition must respond with force." A deep laugh echoed from the room. "Force? What force?" This was General Mex, a large reptilian creature with red scales and sharp teeth. "The Karathi fleet is strong, yes, but not strong enough to fight the hegemony alone. The Valdorians are scientists, not warriors. The Stonemen are miners. What about the humans?" asked another voice, smaller and squeakier. Bob thought it might be one of the squeaker delegates from the forest worlds. General Mex laughed again. "The humans? They are good for cleaning and carrying things. Look at this one here." Bob realized with a start that Mex was talking about him. 14 years he mops these floors. Quiet, weak, harmless. "This is what humans do best." Bob kept mopping, moving the water around in slow circles. His face showed nothing. He had learned long ago how to keep his face empty when people talked about him like he was not there. "Their military is small," agreed Ambassador Rock. 20,000 soldiers in their entire fleet. The hegemony has 20 million. "Numbers are not everything," said Ambassador Lyra. "Perhaps we do not fully understand human capabilities." "What capabilities?" General Mex snorted. "They joined us because they needed protection. Before that, they fought each other for hundreds of years. Small wars on tiny planets, child's play compared to galactic warfare." Bob wrung out his mop and moved to a different section of floor. The conversation continued, but now they were talking about supply lines and defensive positions. Technical stuff that would bore most people. Bob listened carefully to every word. When he finished with the hallway, Bob moved to the next section. The diplomatic quarters had 57 rooms, and he cleaned them all. Each room had different requirements. The Valdorians needed their crystals polished. The stonemen left rock dust everywhere. The squeakers made nests out of papers and had to be asked politely to move so he could clean underneath. In the afternoon, Bob cleaned the memorial wall in the main plaza. This was his favorite part of the job. The wall had names carved into black stone. Coalition soldiers who had died defending member worlds from pirates, raiders, and small conflicts. There were thousands of names written in dozens of different languages and symbols. Bob ran his cloth over the smooth stone, cleaning each name carefully. He knew most of them by heart now. Good soldiers, all of them. They had died far from home, protecting people they had never met. At the bottom of the wall in small letters were the human names. There were not many. 43 names from the last 20 years. Bob had known some of them. Good people who believed in something bigger than themselves. "Excuse me," said a voice behind him. Bob turned to see Ambassador Lyra standing there. Up close, her crystal skin caught the light and threw tiny rainbows on the walls. "I hope I am not disturbing your work." "No problem, Ambassador," Bob said. "Just finishing up here." Lyra looked at the memorial wall for a moment. "Do you ever think about the names here? The lives they represent?" Bob nodded. "Every day." "I imagine you must have known some of the human soldiers listed here." "A few," Bob said carefully. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Bob's jacket. It was old and faded, military green with several ribbons pinned to the chest. Most aliens thought they were decorations or rank markers from his cleaning job. "Those are interesting patches," she said. "Very colorful." Bob looked down at his jacket. "Just old stuff. Nothing special." But Lyra was studying them more carefully now. Her crystal eyes seemed to focus on each ribbon individually. Bob felt uncomfortable under her gaze. "Well," he said, putting his cleaning supplies back on the cart. "Better get moving. Still got the transport bay to do before shift ends." "Of course," Lyra said. "Thank you for keeping our station so clean, Bob. Your work is appreciated." Bob nodded and pushed his cart away. He did not see Lyra take out a small device and photograph his jacket. He did not see her upload the images to the Valdorian military database. He did not know that she spent the rest of the evening researching human military decorations. By the time Bob finished his shift and went to his small quarters near the maintenance section, Ambassador Lyra was staring at her computer screen in shock. The quiet janitor who had cleaned her office for 14 years was not who everyone thought he was. Not even close. Ambassador Lyra could not sleep. She had been staring at her computer screen for 6 hours, cross-referencing Bob's ribbons with every military database in the Coalition archives. What she found made no sense. The faded green ribbon with 3 white stripes was the Human Medal of Valor, only given to soldiers who saved entire units in combat. The blue one with silver stars was for wounds received in battle. Bob had 4 of them. The red ribbon with gold edges was something called the Mars Campaign Medal. According to the database, only 300 humans had ever earned one, but the ribbon that made Lyra's crystal hands shake was the small one at the top. Plain purple with a single white star. The database called it the Medal of Honor. It was humanity's highest military decoration, only awarded for actions beyond the call of duty in the face of extreme danger. The database said only 47 had been given out in the last 50 years. 31 of those soldiers were dead. Lyra read the requirements again. Acts of personal bravery or self-sacrifice so conspicuous that they clearly distinguished the individual above his comrades. The deed performed must have involved risk of life. There must have been no alternative but to act as the individual did. This was not the record of a janitor. This was the record of a hero. She pulled up the human military archives next. The Coalition had access to basic information about member worlds' armed forces, but the details were classified. Still, she could see unit assignments, campaign records, and casualty reports. Robert Hayes, service number 24601, enlisted at age 18. First assignment, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Mars Theater. The Mars Rebellion had been humanity's bloodiest conflict before they joined the Coalition. 3 years of brutal fighting in the asteroid mines and underground colonies. The rebels had used the tunnels like a maze, ambushing government forces and disappearing into the dark. Bob's unit had been sent to clear the rebel stronghold at Olympus Station. Of the 200 soldiers who went down into those tunnels, only 12 came back up. Bob was one of them. After Mars came the Titan Wars, 5 years of combat on the ice moons of Saturn. Then the Belt conflicts where pirates and miners fought over asteroid claims. Bob's name appeared in report after report. Successful operations, heroic actions, units saved from destruction, but the details were locked away in classified files. Lyra could see the shadows of Bob's service, but not the full picture. She made a decision that would have seemed impossible yesterday. She activated her emergency diplomatic channels and contacted the Valdorian Intelligence Service. "This is Ambassador Lyra aboard Crossroads Hub," she said into the secure communicator. "I need access to restricted Coalition military files. Authorization Omega-7. The response took 3 hours. When it came, it brought information that changed everything Lyra thought she knew about humans. The Mars Rebellion had not been a small conflict. It was a war of extinction. The rebels had developed weapons that could kill with a touch, nerve agents that worked through skin contact, bombs that turned atmosphere into poison. The government forces faced an enemy that fought without rules or mercy. Bob's unit, the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, specialized in deep penetration raids behind enemy lines. They went into places where no sane person would go and did things that no normal person could do. The Olympus Station operation was their final mission. Olympus Station was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. 30 levels of tunnels and chambers, all filled with rebels who had nothing left to lose. The station's life support systems had been rigged as a massive bomb. If the rebels lost, they would take the entire asteroid belt with them. 200 soldiers went in through the main entrance. The rebels were waiting. Automated weapons, poison gas, explosive traps. Within 6 hours, only Bob's 12-man squad was still alive, trapped 15 levels down with no way out. That was when Bob did something that defied belief. According to the classified report, Sergeant Robert Hayes led his squad through 17 levels of enemy territory using maintenance shafts and air ducts. They moved like ghosts, avoiding sensors and patrols. When they reached the life support center, they found it heavily defended. Bob ordered his squad to stay hidden while he went in alone. Using nothing but a knife in his bare hands, he killed 14 rebel guards without making a sound. Then he disarmed the bomb that would have destroyed half the solar system. The rebels never knew their weapon was gone until government forces retook the station 3 days later. For this action, Bob received the Medal of Honor. For the wounds he took during the escape, he received his 4th Purple Heart. For his leadership during the entire campaign, he received the Mars Medal, but there was more. After Mars came Titan, where Bob's platoon held a mining station against 500 pirates for 6 days without relief. Then came the Belt Wars, where Lieutenant Hayes led deep space raids against smuggler bases hidden in the asteroid fields. By the time he retired, Bob had served in every major human conflict of the past 30 years. He had commendations for bravery, leadership, tactical genius, and personal sacrifice. His final rank was Lieutenant Colonel, though he had turned down promotion to full colonel 3 times. The file ended with his retirement papers. Reason for leaving service, personal choice. Request for quiet assignment approved. Lyra sat back in her chair, feeling dizzy. The humble janitor who cleaned her office every day was one of the most decorated soldiers in human history. He had killed hundreds of enemies and saved thousands of lives. He had fought in battles that would give nightmares to coalition generals. And for 14 years he had been emptying trash cans and mopping floors. She thought about all the times she had seen him working. Always quiet, always careful, never drawing attention to himself. Now she understood why. Bob was not hiding from recognition. He was hiding from memories, but the galaxy was about to change. The hegemony was coming, and the coalition needed warriors like Bob Hayes. The question was whether a man who had traded his medals for a mop would be willing to fight again. Lyra looked at the time. Bob's shift started in 3 hours. She had that long to decide whether to keep his secret or reveal it to the coalition leadership. The decision would determine whether Bob Hayes remained a janitor or became humanity's greatest weapon in the war to come. Bob was fixing a broken recycling unit in Storage Bay 12 when Ambassador Lyra found him. The bay was empty except for supply crates and the steady hum of the air recyclers. Lyra had chosen the location carefully. No other aliens came here during the day shift. "Hello, Bob," she said, her crystal voice echoing in the empty space. Bob looked up from the recycling unit. His hands were covered in grease and there was a streak of oil across his forehead. "Morning, Ambassador? Something I can help you with?" Lyra moved closer, her crystal feet clicking on the metal floor. "I wanted to talk to you about your jacket. The ribbons you wear." Bob's face did not change, but Lyra noticed his hands stop moving. "Just old patches, like I said. Nothing important." "The purple one with the white star," Lyra continued. "That is the Medal of Honor, is it not?" The silence stretched between them. Bob slowly wiped his hands on a rag and stood up. He was not tall, maybe average height for a human, but something about the way he moved made Lyra step back. "Where did you get that information?" Bob asked quietly. "I researched human military decorations," Lyra said. "The Coalition database has basic information about member world military traditions." Bob nodded slowly. "And what else does the database say?" "It says the Medal of Honor is given for actions beyond the call of duty. It says only 47 humans have received one in the past 50 years. It says 31 of them are dead." Bob sat down on a supply crate and looked at his hands. They were scarred and calloused from years of cleaning work, but Lyra could see older scars underneath. Thin lines that could only come from combat. "You looked deeper than the basic database," Bob said. "Yes. How much do you know?" Lyra took a deep breath. "I know about Mars, about the Olympus Station operation. I know about Titan and the Belt Wars. I know you served for 15 years and retired as a lieutenant colonel." Bob was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different. "Older somehow and tired. Why did you look me up?" The coalition is facing a war with the hegemony, Lyra said. Our military leaders believe we are not strong enough to win. They dismiss human military capabilities. They are probably right, Bob said. Humans are not naturally suited for galactic warfare. We are too small, too slow, too short-lived compared to most species. But you won your wars. Bob laughed, but there was no humor in it. We won because we had no choice. When someone is trying to kill you and everyone you care about, you find ways to win that other people would not think of. Lyra moved closer. The coalition needs to find those ways now. The hegemony has superior numbers and technology. They are conquering our outer worlds, I know, Bob said. I hear the reports every day while I clean the conference rooms. Then you understand why I came to you. Bob stood up and began gathering his tools. I understand why you came, but I cannot help you. Cannot or will not. Bob stopped moving. Both. Lyra felt frustration building in her crystal chest. You have knowledge that could save billions of lives. How can you refuse? Because I know what that knowledge costs, Bob said, turning to face her. Do you want to know what really happened on Mars? What I did to win the Medal of Honor. Lyra nodded. Bob sat back down and stared at the wall. Olympus Station was not just a rebel base. It was their capital city. 50,000 people lived there. Men, women, children. Most of them were not fighters. They were just trying to survive in a war they did not start. He paused, lost in memory. The rebels had rigged the station to explode if we took it. But they also had families there. Hostages, in a way. The government told us to take the station anyway. Said the sacrifice was necessary for the greater good. Lyra waited. I led my squad through 17 levels of tunnels. We moved like shadows, killing quietly, leaving no trace. I murdered 14 guards who were protecting their homes. Some of them were teenagers, younger than I was. Bob's voice became flat, emotionless. When I disarmed the bomb, I saved the solar system. But I also doomed 50,000 people to live under government rule. Half of them died in the labor camps over the next 5 years. The other half wished they had died in the explosion. Lyra felt her crystal skin grow cold. You saved lives. I traded lives, Bob corrected. 50,000 rebels for 50 million civilians in the belt. The math was simple. But math does not take away the nightmares. He stood up again and picked up his toolbox. After Mars came Titan. We fought pirates who were trying to take the ice mines. Sounds heroic, right? Except the pirates were mostly refugees from Mars. People who had lost everything and turned to crime to survive. I killed hundreds of them. Bob walked toward the door, then stopped. Then came the Belt Wars. 5 years of hunting down smugglers and claim jumpers. Most of them were just trying to feed their families. But they were breaking coalition law, so we killed them too. He turned back to Lyra. 15 years of being the best killer in the human military. 15 years of making the hard choices that other people could not make. Do you know what I learned? Lyra shook her head. I learned that winning is not the same as being right. I learned that heroes are just people who are willing to live with terrible choices. And I learned that there is always a cost. Bob moved toward the door again. The coalition wants to fight the hegemony the way they have always fought wars. Honor rules clean battles between soldiers. That is not how humans win wars. You know, how do humans win wars? Lyra asked. Bob stopped in the doorway and looked back at her. By becoming monsters, he said. By doing things that make the enemy afraid to fight us. By being willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve victory. He paused. The coalition is not ready for that kind of war, and I am not willing to teach them. Bob left Lyra alone in the storage bay. She stood there for a long time thinking about what he had said. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of the station. Aliens talking, machinery humming, life going on as usual. But everything had changed. Lyra now understood why Bob had chosen to be a janitor. He was not hiding from recognition. He was hiding from himself. The question was whether the galaxy could afford to let him hide much longer. The emergency alarm cut through the morning like a knife. Bob dropped his mop and looked up at the flashing red lights that now painted the corridor in urgent color. He had heard that sound only once before, during a drill 3 years ago. This was not a drill. All personnel report to emergency stations, announced the station computer. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Bob left his cleaning cart and hurried toward the main plaza. The corridors filled with aliens rushing in all directions. Some looked scared. Others looked angry. All of them looked worried. In the plaza, massive screens showed star maps with blinking red dots. Each dot was a coalition world. Each blink meant the world was under attack. There were dozens of them. Ambassador Lyra stood near the memorial wall reading reports on a tablet. Her crystal skin had turned a darker blue, which Bob had learned meant she was stressed. When she saw him, she walked over. "The hegemony has begun their offensive," she said without greeting. 17 worlds attacked simultaneously. They broke through our outer defenses in less than 6 hours. Bob looked at the star map. The pattern was clear. The hegemony was not trying to hold territory. They were driving straight toward the coalition core worlds. Classic blitzkrieg tactics. What about coalition fleet response? He asked. Admiral Stone's Third Fleet engaged the enemy at Kepler Station. They lasted 23 minutes. Bob felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Third Fleet had 200 ships, the finest warships in coalition space. If they were gone in 23 minutes, the hegemony was stronger than anyone had imagined. Casualties? He asked. Total, Lyra said. No survivors. The plaza continued filling with aliens. Bob could see fear spreading through the crowd like a disease. These people had never faced a real war. The coalition had been peaceful for almost a century. Their military was designed to fight pirates and smugglers, not a galactic empire. General Mex appeared on the main screen, his red scales gleaming under the bright lights. Citizens of the coalition, he announced, we face a grave threat. The hegemony has launched unprovoked attacks on our member worlds, but we will not surrender. We will fight them with every ship, every soldier, every weapon at our disposal. Bob almost laughed. Mex was a good politician, but a terrible general. He thought war was about speeches and heroic gestures. The hegemony did not care about coalition bravery. They cared about results. Over the next 3 days, the results became clear. The coalition was losing badly. Reports flooded in from the front lines. The Karathi heavy cruisers, pride of the coalition fleet, were being destroyed by hegemony weapons they could not even see. The Stoneman defensive fortresses, thought to be impregnable, fell in hours to hegemony siege ships. The Valdorian scout fleets vanished without trace. Bob watched it all while cleaning the diplomatic quarters. The aliens held meeting after meeting, planning strategies that would have worked against pirates but meant nothing against a real military force. They talked about honor and defensive positions and supply lines. They did not talk about winning. On the 4th day, the refugees began arriving. Transport ships limped into Crossroads Hub carrying survivors from the outer worlds. Bob saw families who had lost everything, soldiers without units, government officials whose governments no longer existed. The station's medical bay overflowed with wounded. The cafeterias became refugee camps. Bob helped where he could. He carried supplies, moved wounded soldiers, and cleaned up after the emergency medical teams. The work was familiar. He had done the same thing on Mars and Titan and a dozen other worlds. One of the wounded soldiers was human. Corporal Davis, age 22, from the 5th Infantry Regiment. She had been on Frontier Station when the hegemony attacked. Of the 3,000 coalition defenders, she was one of 40 who escaped. They came out of nowhere, she told Bob while he helped change her bandages. Ships that could turn invisible. Weapons that went through our shields like they were not there. We held the main bunker for 6 hours before they broke through. What happened then? Bob asked. They did not take prisoners, Davis said quietly. Coalition rules of war mean nothing to them. They killed everyone. Soldiers, civilians, medical staff. I only survived because I was unconscious under a pile of bodies. Bob finished the bandage in silence. He had seen this before. An enemy that fought without rules or mercy. The hegemony was not interested in conquest. They wanted extermination. That evening, Ambassador Lyra found him in the refugee camp. The coalition leadership wants to evacuate Crossroads Hub, she said. Fall back to the core worlds and establish a defensive line there. That will not work, Bob said, handing out food packages to a family of squeakers. The hegemony has momentum now. If you give them time to consolidate their gains, they will be unstoppable. Then what do you suggest? Bob looked around the camp. Hundreds of aliens who had lost their homes. Thousands more arriving every day. Soon there would be millions. I suggest you find someone who knows how to fight a real war, he said. Lyra moved closer. I know someone like that. Bob shook his head. I told you before. I cannot help. Cannot or will not. Both. Even now? Even seeing this? Bob looked at a small squeaker child who was crying for her parents. They had not made it off their homeworld. Especially now, he said. But that night, alone in his quarters, Bob lay awake staring at the ceiling. Outside his window, he could see more refugee ships arriving. The docking bays were full, so they waited in long lines, their emergency lights blinking in the darkness. He thought about Corporal Davis and her story. He thought about the squeaker child crying for parents who would never come home. He thought about 50,000 people on Olympus Station who had died because he made a choice. Bob got out of bed and opened his footlocker. Under the cleaning supplies and spare uniforms was a sealed metal case. He had not opened it in 14 years. Inside were his real medals. Not the faded ribbons on his jacket, but the actual decorations. Polished metal and bright silk that represented 15 years of war. At the bottom of the case was a picture of his last unit. 12 soldiers who had followed him into hell and trusted him to bring them back. Only 6 of them had come home. Bob closed the case and put it back in the footlocker. But he did not go back to sleep. Instead, he sat by his window and watched the refugee ships arrive, carrying the broken pieces of the Coalition's outer worlds. Somewhere in the distance, the hegemony was coming. And Bob Hayes was starting to remember why he had learned to fight in the first place. The news came at dawn on the 7th day. The hegemony had broken through the Coalition's middle defense line. 12 more worlds had fallen overnight. The enemy fleet was now only 3 jumps away from Crossroads Hub. Bob was cleaning the command center when the emergency meeting began. Admiral Stone, the Coalition's supreme military commander, stood before a holographic star map that showed red enemy markers spreading like an infection through Coalition space. "Gentlemen, ladies, honored delegates," Stone began, his granite voice cracking slightly. "We must face reality. The hegemony advance cannot be stopped with conventional tactics. We need new strategies." General Mech slammed his clawed hand on the table. "We need more ships. More soldiers! The Karathi can provide 50 additional cruisers if given. Time? Time we do not have," replied Admiral Stone. "The enemy will reach our core worlds in less than 2 weeks." Bob continued wiping down the conference table, moving quietly around the arguing aliens. He had learned to be invisible during meetings like this, but he was listening to every word. "Perhaps we should consider negotiation," suggested one of the squeaker delegates. "The hegemony must want something. Territory, resources, trade agreements." "They want us dead," said Ambassador Lyra quietly. "The refugees all tell the same story. The hegemony takes no prisoners. They destroy everything." Bob paused in his cleaning. Lyra was looking directly at him. Her crystal eyes held a question he was not ready to answer. The meeting continued for 3 hours. They discussed supply lines, defensive positions, and evacuation plans. They talked about everything except how to actually win. Bob had heard the same discussions on Mars, on Titan, and in the Belt. Military leaders trying to fight the last war instead of the current one. When the meeting ended, most of the aliens filed out arguing among themselves. Admiral Stone remained behind, staring at the star map with tired eyes. He looked old and defeated. "Excuse me, Admiral," said Ambassador Lyra. "I have a suggestion." Stone turned. "Any suggestion is welcome at this point, Ambassador. There is someone on this station who has experience fighting wars like this. Someone who might have ideas about unconventional tactics." Stone's eyebrows rose. "A military advisor? Who?" Lyra gestured toward Bob, who was putting cleaning supplies back on his cart. "Robert Hayes." Stone looked confused. "The janitor?" "Former Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes," Lyra corrected. "Veteran of the Mars Rebellion, the Titan Wars, and the Belt conflicts. Recipient of the Medal of Honor and numerous other decorations." Bob stopped loading his cart. The room became very quiet. Stone walked over to him. "Is this true?" Bob looked at Ambassador Lyra, then at Admiral Stone. "It is true. Why did you not tell anyone?" "Because I retired," Bob said simply. "I chose a different life." Stone studied Bob's face. "But you still remember how to fight?" Bob was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the star map, where red enemy markers were spreading toward the Coalition core worlds. "Yes," he said, "I remember." "Then I am officially requesting your consultation," Stone said. "The Coalition needs every tactical advantage we can find." Bob set down his cleaning supplies and walked to the star map. He studied the enemy positions for several minutes while Stone and Lyra waited. "The hegemony is not trying to conquer Coalition space," Bob said finally. "They are trying to destroy it. Look at their pattern of advance." He pointed to the red markers. "They hit your supply depots first, then your communication relays, then your military bases. They are not taking territory. They are cutting your ability to respond. Yes, we noticed that, Stone said. But how do we counter it? Bob was quiet, thinking. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was sharper, more focused. The voice of a soldier. You stop trying to defend everything and start attacking what matters to them. Explain. Bob manipulated the star map, zooming in on the hegemony advance. They are moving fast, which means their supply lines are stretched thin. They have to keep moving forward or their fleet will run out of fuel and ammunition. So we attack their supply ships? No, Bob said. We make them think their supply ships are under attack. Force them to divert forces to protect convoys that we are not actually hitting. Stone looked confused. I do not understand. Bob smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Psychological warfare, Admiral. You make the enemy afraid of threats that do not exist. While they are chasing ghosts, you hit them where they are actually vulnerable. For the next 2 hours, Bob outlined a strategy unlike anything the Coalition had ever attempted. Instead of meeting the hegemony in direct battle, Coalition forces would use hit-and-run tactics. Small units would strike supply convoys, communication relays, and isolated ships. They would use stealth technology to appear larger than they were. They would spread false intelligence to make the hegemony believe Coalition resistance was stronger than it actually was. This is not honorable warfare, General Mex protested. These are guerrilla tactics, the tactics of criminals and terrorists. These are the tactics of people who want to survive, Bob replied coldly. Honor does not matter if you are dead. But our military is not trained for this kind of fighting, Admiral Stone said. Our ships are designed for direct engagement. Then retrain them, Bob said. Fast. Over the next 3 days, Bob worked 18 hours a day with Coalition military leaders. He taught them how to use asteroid fields for ambushes. He showed them how to modify civilian ships for hit-and-run attacks. He explained how to coordinate small unit operations across multiple star systems. Most importantly, he taught them how to think like the enemy. The hegemony commanders are used to fighting conventional wars, he explained to a group of ship captains. They expect you to meet them in open battle with your best ships and strongest weapons. When you do not, they will become frustrated and make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Asked Captain Reed, commander of the human cruiser Liberty. They will divide their forces, Bob said. Send ships to hunt you down in small groups. That is when you hit them. The first test came when a hegemony advance fleet entered the Tau sector. Instead of meeting them with the sector defense force, Admiral Stone followed Bob's plan. The Coalition ships retreated, but left behind automated beacons that broadcast false fleet signatures. The hegemony commander, seeing what appeared to be a large Coalition force hiding in the asteroid belt, divided his fleet to surround and destroy them. When his ships moved into the belt, they found only empty space and magnetic mines. While the hegemony was searching for ghosts, Captain Reed's small task force hit their supply depot in the next system. They destroyed 3 months' worth of ammunition and fuel, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The hegemony advance slowed. It is working, Admiral Stone told Bob after reviewing the battle reports. Their advance has stopped in 4 sectors. This is just the beginning, Bob replied. Now we make them afraid. But as Bob watched the star map update with new Coalition victories, he felt something cold growing in his chest. He was remembering why he had been good at war, and why he had stopped fighting. Winning was easy when you were willing to do anything to achieve it. The hard part was living with yourself afterward. 3 months into the war, the Coalition was winning, but victory looked nothing like what Admiral Stone had expected. Bob stood in the command center, watching real-time reports from across the galaxy. Red markers showed hegemony forces retreating from 12 star systems. Blue markers showed Coalition ships pursuing them. Green markers showed supply lines that were finally stable. The numbers told the story. Hegemony advance stopped. Coalition casualties down 60%. Enemy fleet strength reduced by 40%. By any measure, Bob's strategy was succeeding, but Admiral Stone looked sick. Report from the Vega sector, announced Lieutenant Park, the communications officer. Captain Mills has successfully destroyed the hegemony fuel depot. No Coalition casualties. And the civilian population on Vega Station? Stone asked. Park hesitated. The depot was built next to a refugee camp. Estimated civilian casualties are 8,000. Stone closed his eyes. Acknowledged. Bob watched the exchange without emotion. 8,000 civilians dead to cripple an enemy fleet of 50,000 soldiers. The mathematics were simple, but mathematics did not make the deaths easier to accept. Sir, Park continued, Captain Chen reports successful completion of Operation Ghostwalker. The fake distress signals worked. Hegemony rescue ships diverted from the main fleet. How many rescue ships? 12, sir. All destroyed while trying to respond to the false emergency. Bob nodded. Ghostwalker had been his idea. Use fake distress calls to lure enemy ships into ambushes. It was effective because it exploited the hegemony's one weakness. They actually cared about their own people. The coalition had learned to use that against them. Admiral, Bob said, we need to discuss the final phase. Stone looked at him with tired eyes. What final phase? Bob manipulated the star map, highlighting the hegemony core systems. They are pulling back to defensive positions around their homeworlds. If we let them regroup, they will be back in 5 years with a larger fleet. So what do you propose? We finish them. The room became quiet. Ambassador Lyra, who had been monitoring the conversation, moved closer. What does that mean exactly? She asked. Bob's expression was neutral. It means we destroy their ability to make war. Their shipyards, their military academies, their command structure. Everything. And their civilian population? Stone asked quietly. The hegemony does not separate military and civilian infrastructure, Bob replied. Their factories build both civilian goods and military equipment. Their schools train both teachers and soldiers. To defeat them completely, we have to target everything. Lyra's crystal skin turned pale blue. You are talking about genocide. I am talking about ending the war, Bob said. The hegemony started this conflict. They chose to fight without rules or mercy. Now they have to face the consequences. There has to be another way, Stone protested. Bob looked at him with cold eyes. There is. You can let them rebuild and attack you again in 10 years. Maybe 20 if you are lucky. How many coalition worlds will they destroy next time? The argument continued for hours. Stone wanted to offer the hegemony terms for surrender. Lyra supported negotiations through neutral parties. Other coalition leaders called for war crimes tribunals and occupation forces. Bob listened to it all with growing frustration. These people still did not understand what kind of war they were fighting. The hegemony does not surrender, he said finally. They do not negotiate. They do not accept defeat. The only way to stop them is to remove their ability to fight, permanently. And if we do that, Lyra asked, what does that make us? Alive, Bob answered. The final battle came 2 weeks later. Bob's strategy had driven the hegemony fleet back to their home system, where they made their last stand around the planet Dominion. It was a fortress world, protected by orbital weapons platforms and a fleet of 800 ships. Bob's plan was simple and terrible. Instead of attacking the fleet directly, coalition forces would target the planet's infrastructure. Power plants, communication centers, orbital elevators. Once the planet was crippled, the fleet would have no choice but to surrender or watch their homeworld die. The attack lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Dominion was dark. No power, no communications, no way to support the massive population of 12 billion people. The hegemony fleet surrendered. Bob stood in the command center, watching the enemy ships power down their weapons. Around him, coalition officers celebrated. They had won the greatest military victory in galactic history. But Bob felt nothing except emptiness. Congratulations, Admiral Stone said, walking over to him. Your strategy worked. Yes, Bob said. It worked. The Coalition Council wants to offer you any position you desire. Admiral, General, Minister of Defense. Whatever you want. Bob shook his head. I want to go back to cleaning floors. Stone looked confused. After what you have accomplished? You are a hero. You saved the galaxy. Bob looked at the star map one last time. Dominion was represented by a gray dot now, a dead world with 12 billion people struggling to survive without power or technology. Heroes do not leave planets full of dead civilians, Bob said quietly. They were our enemies. They were people. Bob walked toward the door, then stopped. Make sure relief supplies reach Dominion. Food, medicine, power generators, whatever they need. The Council will never approve that, Stone said. They were our enemies. Bob turned back to him. Then you learned nothing from this war. 3 days later, Bob was back to his old routine. Cleaning floors, emptying trash, maintaining the recycling systems. The work was simple and honest. It hurt no one, but things were different now. Other species treated him with a mixture of respect and fear. They had seen what humans could do when pushed to war. They had watched Bob turn their greatest enemy into a broken fleet orbiting a dying world. Ambassador Lyra found him in the Memorial Wall Plaza. New names had been added to the Black Stone. Coalition soldiers who had died in the war. The list was shorter than it could have been, but longer than Bob wished. "How do you live with it?" she asked. Bob looked up from his cleaning. "With what?" "The choices you made. The things you did to win." Bob was quiet for a moment. Then he went back to polishing the memorial wall. "You remembered that the alternative was worse," he said. "You remember that sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. And you try to make sure you never have to make them again." Lyra watched him work. "Do you regret it?" Bob paused, his hand resting on a new name carved into the stone. Corporal Davis, age 22. She had died leading a boarding action against a hegemony cruiser. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally, "but I do not regret doing what had to be done." Lyra nodded and walked away, leaving Bob alone with the memorial wall. He finished cleaning the stone, reading each name carefully. These people had died because he had taught the Coalition how to fight like humans. They had died because sometimes, to protect innocent life, you had to be willing to take it. Bob packed up his cleaning supplies and moved on to the next section. Tomorrow there would be more floors to clean, more trash to empty, more simple work that hurt no one. But he would carry the weight of victory for the rest of his life, just as he carried the weight of all his other wars. That was the price of being good at things that should never need to be done. Outside the Memorial Plaza, the galaxy continued its peaceful business. Ships came and went. Aliens traded and talked and lived their lives without fear. They were safe because Bob Hayes had remembered how to fight, and they would stay safe as long as he could forget again.